So if you're going to present at FyreCon, you need to think about what you love that you want to share. And you want to be specific about this. A lot of people love everything that they do. I'm a writer. I don't think there's any part of writing I don't love. And it's taken me, depending on how you count, it's taken me either 12 years or 60 years to become the writer that I am. I'm not going to cover even 12 years in a 1 or 2 hour class. So I love lots of things about writing, but for the purposes of a class, I need focus. Whenever you have generalities that you're trying to teach, you have to turn them into specific examples anyway. So for a FyreCon class, try to start with specifics. Try to start with something very, very specific. And then from there, afterwards, your students can try to build to the general. And they'll know how to find you because you'll give contact information. You notice my website address at the bottom of each slide, and I had my email address on the slide. They'll know how to find you. They can come back and ask you for how to go to the general, but try to dig deep into the specific. So a class on animals of the history of the world is not nearly as useful as a class on fish of the Great Lakes and how the culture has grown up around them. And you could do a really good subject matter expert class on how the natives in the Michigan area built their lives around the fish, or at least those on the coast did. And you could do that. You could do a fantastic thing just on fish and their ties to the people and to the culture and the mythology of that. You could do that, and you could do that for an hour, and you would have a fascinating class, as opposed to, I want to talk about animals through history. So be specific. Find a thing you really love. Sometimes you'll do it by building a class around a favorite story or an author or a book, and then use that to build on that. So you could say that I want to do the depiction of the Fae in Jim Butcher's Harry Dresden books. And if you're a Dresden fanatic like some friends I have, you could do a really in-depth talk on just that and draw lessons from it that apply to other books and apply to what other people might write. Try to talk about how he varied in his faith from the more traditional, classic Spenser's Fairy Queen and so on. Take that specific story, draw lessons from it, and then if you think it's too obscure, let FyreCon decide that. We as writers often have a phrase, don't self-reject. If you have a story you don't think that a particular market's going to want, let the editor decide that. Now that's clearly, you've got some limits. If it's out-and-out fantasy, you don't send it to Analog, which is strictly a science fiction magazine. But if it's science fiction with the return of elves, and you say, is that fantasy or is that science fiction? Let Analog decide that. Similarly, don't think your talk is too unique, too specific. Let FyreCon decide that. And let me give you an example of this. I happen to be a huge fan of How I Met Your Mother, the TV series, because I'm a huge fan of frame stories. And in fact, I've written more than a few of myself. But more than that, I started when I'm watching the end of How I Met Your Mother. If you hate the ending, that's fine. You're allowed to be wrong. But I love the ending, and I watched this whole thing come together, and I realized that this was more than a frame story. This was a frame story where all the pieces in the frame, all of the sub-stories, were all from one set of characters, one universe, and so on, as opposed to Canterbury Tales or 1001 Nights, where the frame story of why we're telling these stories is separate from the stories themselves, entirely different universes practically. And I said, I love this topic. I want to talk on this topic. It's too obscure. It's too niche. And I submitted, and they said, oh, sure. We love that. Go ahead and talk about that. So don't be afraid to take your favorite influences and build a class around those and see what lessons you can draw. Because that's the important thing. Your favorite influences, your favorite stories, they have taught you things. Introduce those same topics built around your favorites. So that's one approach.